Welcome back. I'm Roy with Rugged Badger Racing. This is our Ecotec swap ChampCar and Gridlife Miata, and we are getting this prep for the Gridlife event. We also need to build a new splitter for ChampCar. Now I'm here with Nick.
Hey.
And we are going to be working on a splitter. So we fit the old splitter, which is really crunched up just to get dimensions. Now we have a new style of splitter that we want to work with, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But for starters, we have this big panel of 5x10 6mm aluminolite. We have a 4x10 10mm aluminolite. Now, initial findings are interesting because the 10mm aluminolite is actually slightly less heavy than the 6mm. The 6mm is 0.82 pounds per square foot, where the 10mm is 0.80 pounds. Now, we're doing a little bit of testing. My thought is that the 10mm would have been more rigid, and we wouldn't have to double up the 6mm material. But we're actually getting really good rigidity out of the 6mm material, maybe even better than the 10mm here. So we'll see what we're going to use. First, we're going to map out, we'll do some traces and figure out how many splitters we can get out of this material, because ideally, I want one for Gridlife, one for ChampCar, and then one for my street car as well. Let's get started. All right, so for ChampCar, I want to use a slightly different style, which I'll get into in a moment. But first, I need a measurement. Now, ChampCar allows us to go 12 inches out from the front of the air dam. On the back side, however, I need to know how much until we hit our oil pan. And we're looking at about 18 to 18.5 inches from the oil pan to the front of the air dam. That's going to give us a lot of room to work with that particular style. Let's get this bumper out. Let's get it traced and see if we have enough space for the Gridlife as well as the ChampCar design. All right, so we have our splitter laid flat. Now, for Gridlife, we don't need a ton of rigidity because we cannot cut any holes in this. Where on this one, we have these big splitter diffusers. That can't be there. When we add those, it does take out a lot of rigidity. I think we'll be good with just one singular flat plane with Gridlife. Another rule about Gridlife is you can only go 3 inches in front of the air dam at any point. And if you can look at this red mark, that is 3 inches. We are quite a bit far in front of that. But when we measure out, it looks like we'll be able to cut this panel. We'll be able to make a Gridlife splitter, largely replicating this without the splitter diffusers, adding a 3-inch lip over here. It's going to bolt to the subframe. We'll also have the front supports, which you see there. We might tweak that design a little bit. And maybe we'll reuse this air dam. We do have a second bumper, but I'll probably end up using that second bumper for ChampCar. Now, over on the ChampCar side, what we actually want to do, because we can go 12 inches out from the furthest point, we can actually come out to about here, and we can extend that all the way down. What I want to do is create a cambered plane with a very small amount of bend in it, and I want to put that at an angle. And I've been using an online calculator to calculate how much downforce, and I believe that's going to give us the most downforce, and it's going to be able to maximize what we can do within the ChampCar rule set. To do that, we're going to need a lot of material. So we're going to need about 65 inches, which we're going to have enough material across almost this entire 5 feet. We're actually going to flip that over and bend it after we make some cuts. Let's get started. All right, so we put the original bumper that came on the car back on the car. Right now we're removing the 9 Lives Racing air dam because this thing is really wavy, and we want to be able to use the outline of the upper part of the bumper to trace where we want to put our air dam support on the new splitter. Because rather than the 9 Lives Racing style, which I think has a few brackets, we use this garden trimming actually, and it ends up working out really well and creates a nice support, which you can see here all the way along the bottom of the air dam. So we're going to replicate that on the new splitter here once we get that all measured. Also got all the hardware off of the old splitter. So we have some splitter blocks. We have some supports from Professional Awesome as well that go to the support rods. So that's all off and ready to go on at least one of these new splitters. All right, we have our splitter test fitted. Now, I just have 2 bolts in the subframe holding the splitter in position. Kind of see the clearance there. Generally speaking, everything looks real good. Now, the whole front of this, the whole shape, we haven't cut any of that yet. We will cut it once we actually have the air dam on. Right now, what we're trying to do is get positioning for the support, which is going to be following a line vertically for the air dam. So that's what we're going to create now. And then we can go ahead and put on the garden edging, wherever that is, and then we can begin to mount an air dam. Now we're first going to mount the air dam to the splitter, and then what we're going to do is rest the air dam against the bumper and then trim the top of the air dam. So the bottom is always going to be flush, and then we'll mount it to the bumper as a second step. All right, so we went ahead, we have all our marks here. This is where our premium garden edging is going to go. Now this is the heavy duty, nothing but the best garden edging from Amazon, because we want nothing but the best for our race car. Now, from a hardware perspective, I have my number 10 and number 8 hardware bin. We're probably going to use number 8 because that should be a little bit lighter weight, and we want to keep this as lightweight as possible. Now the angle is roughly in the position that we're going to want this, but it doesn't really matter so long as it's close and then these dimensions are dialed in. It's not until we set the final air dam and we rivet that to the bumper that that's actually going to set the overall height of our splitter as well as the angle. Let's get to it. All right, making really good progress. So Nick just finished up with the final bolt here. Now this is lined up parallel to the outline of our top bumper. So we used a number 8 screw, just put that with a washer up through the bottom, and then a lock washer with a, or I'm sorry, lock nut with a washer on the top. So that is now in position and cinched up. Now when you tighten it, you don't want to compress the material too much. So we just tighten it a little bit to get a little indent in the material. I'll see if I can get under there and show you. So you can see just enough to get a little indent, but not to collapse the material fully. So we'll get Nick's side trimmed up over here and then start prepping the air dam material. All right, now in order to get the exact height on this, I don't feel comfortable just measuring this. I think I want to get the car on the ground. Before we do that, we need to cut this to length. So what we did is we went ahead and measured 2 3/4 of an inch. Now the Gridlife rule is 3 inches, but we do have a lip on there as well. And we also have the air dam thickness. So we want to cut roughly right along the same line as we have here, and that should be just under the 3-inch rule limit. Once we're done cutting that, we can go ahead and get the car prepped, get it on the ground so we know exactly what this height's going to be and we don't have any surprises from a height perspective. The reason I want to do that is my garage floor is not exactly level. I do have a floor drain and everything is cambered this direction. I just want to be safe rather than sorry. So we have the car on the ground, we rolled it out. What we measured on the back of the subframe is 3 3/4 of an inch. That is our ground clearance. Now at the front, I did measure my shoe. I kind of use that as a guide on how high we want to be. And I think I want to be at about 3 inches. That's going to give us a very slight incline in the back, which is what we want. And then as downforce is applied, it should start to pull that front lip down. Now we still want airflow under the car, so I don't want it to pull down too much. But we found these nice storage organizers that are exactly 3 inches. Put those around the splitter to set the height. Now we're going to take the air dam material, put that in place, and then try to get that in position and attached to the bumper. All right, making really good progress on our air dam here. You can see we did get that cut to 2 3/4. We're putting the air dam in place. We have our first bolt. And you'll notice we cut this to length, but we did not cut the height. We are going to cut the height later once we set it on the car. For now, we're going to go ahead and get this air dam bolted up. And you see we're just putting a bolt in at each point. And the reason we're using bolts for this, we want to have some structural support. This is going to connect to the bumper, and this can provide a lot of strength, especially to prevent the splitter from pulling down due to downforce. Now, previously, we actually had no spars on the front of our splitters. We're able to use only that bumper to provide the support. Now, when the bumper gets hot, it does start to droop a lot more. That's why we added some additional supports, especially when we started to do cuts for these splitter diffusers. We lost a lot of the strength and rigidity. Nonetheless, we're gonna bolt this up, should be ready to go. All right, super easy. We did trim a little bit here. We used the Bauer cutting tool from Harbor Freight, little nipper, worked out really well. Got all these bolted in place. Now we're gonna fit it to the car. We are gonna use 3-inch spacers on the lip to make sure we have that consistent 3-inch lip that's about where we want it. And these happen to be exactly 3 inches. So we'll set these underneath the splitter, get this thing bolted up. All right, so I got the splitter in place. Everything's ready to go. I got the bumper cinched down. Now I don't have fenders. That might affect some of this alignment, so I want to be careful on the edges. But what I'm going to want to do is get this thing placed. Now you'll notice when I push down on the bumper, it moves quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push down on the bumper a little bit. I'm going to hold the Airdam tight, and then I'm going to run a self-tapper through. The self-tapper is just to hold this in position, and then that'll allow me a little bit of time so that I can get my hands in here and then at least attach a few bolts. Then I'll get this off the car and attach the rest of the bolts. So the self-tappers I'm using, I just have this kit here, so I'm just going to use these self-tappers. Now, I hate running self-tappers on the car. I'm definitely going to take those out when I replace them with bolts. The reason why I hate self-tappers is there's nothing really holding them in, and if they vibrate out, they're either going to take out my tire or they're going to take out somebody else's tire. So I don't want to run self-tappers anywhere on the outside of the car. Now I do have a couple in the interior for convenience, but frankly, I don't like it. That was just a matter of timing. Nonetheless, let's get this cinched in place. Let's get everything locked, and then I'll start putting hardware in here. All right, got the initial bolts in, and self-tappers are holding the sides. That way I can finish along the sides here. Before I dive into that, this still has the turn signal housings. So I'm gonna pop those out of each side before I go any further, and then finish bolting this up. And again, I'm just using the number 8s. So we have number 8s holding this in place, number 8s holding this in place, and then we'll have number 8s all the way up to this urethane here. All right, got this all bolted up now. I didn't do the ends just yet because I'll be able to do that once it's finally on the car. But what I'm going to do now is trim. Now on this bumper, there's this groove, which you see on the back side right here. So my plan is, and then that groove extends here. So my plan is to cut right along that groove, and then I can tape that over and then tape it flush. So I've never used this before on a splitter, but I'm going to give this a try because so far this thing has been really convenient and it saves my arms. So I'm just going to take this straight through and then try to cut all the way across, and hopefully this bottom portion here can just stay in that groove. All right, that seemed to go pretty well. Wandered a little bit here and there, but I gotta say it's probably about as good as I could do with tin snips, and it definitely saved my forearms. So I'm happy I went this route. So now I'm gonna cut the radiator ducting. I'm gonna take some measurements off of the old one. Now I want the radiator ducting to be a little bit higher, and then the overall size of this is gonna be 1/3 the size of the radiator core. If you have bigger, it's not going to be as efficient as 1/3 the size. It's just the way radiators work. There's a study done, I think in the 1950s, for airplanes, and it said that, hey, that's going to be the optimum in order to supply air into your radiator. So I'll do that. I'll move it up a little higher, and I want to move it up higher so I can capture more of the high pressure zone here. Hopefully that'll help accelerate the low pressure zone, rather than keeping that nice and low and then the air just goes straight into the radiator ducting. I want to keep that higher up. All right, got some measurements here. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to cut across the red line here, and I'm just going to use this blade. And the idea is that this central flap that can fold down and then mate with the radiator ducting itself. So the air that's coming in from this direction will have a curve to it, and then from that curve, hopefully the air has a better chance of staying attached and flows right through the bottom of the radiator. Now up top, it's kind of a mess anyway from what's in the car, so I'm not too worried about the top and I'm not too worried about the sides, but at least the bottom's going to have this nice flow if I cut across this red line. All right, so I'm working on adding the ducting for the brake ducts. Now, if you've seen the previous videos, you know that I have an issue with brake wear and heat in particular. And previously, you see all the way over there, I just had a hole about the same size as this center hole. Now I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger. But in case for the Gridlife splitter, I'm not as concerned. So I am gonna keep it as high as I can, which you can see on the back side of the shadow. It's maybe 1 inch taller than it needs to be. I'm also gonna put it vertical. So on the other splitter, I'm probably actually gonna put it horizontal. I'm gonna put it a little bit lower, so that's further in the high pressure zone, because for ChampCar, I'm gonna be a lot more worried about the wear on the brakes. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this cut out, and then I can rivet these in place. These are me just reusing the old ones, and I have a new set over there for the ChampCar version. All right, so a little bit different setup this time. I actually put the ducts, I ended up cutting a rectangle I put the ducts here so I can at least have some smoother airflow. Now I wanted to keep a little bit more material here so the high pressure zone stays there, but I can still get airflow for the Gridlife setup. Now on the ChampCar setup, I'm probably going to turn this, and then the opening probably end up right about here. So we'll see. So now I'm going to go ahead and paint it. All right, so got that all painted. Now it's more or less the same shade of white. Now I also have some pecs here. And what I did is I took the pecs just through a table saw, and cut a slit in one side. And this is 3/8 inch pecs. And what I'm going to use this as an edge protector. So I'm basically just going to install this around the splitter. I'll pop a few holes where I'm going to use metal zip ties to hold this in place, and that should be good to go. All right, so I got that on, measured it up. It's 3 inches all the way across, which is perfect, exactly what I need for Gridlife. Now, when you're working with this PEX, what I did is I just took this straight through table saw to cut this channel. Now, this piece obviously wasn't cut very well. You can see the multiple attempts there. But you need to open this up, and I use a screwdriver for that, and I stick it in there to open it up and then press this along. It's not the easiest thing in the world. So what I'm going to do next, I just have gaffer's tape to hold this in place temporarily. I'm going to get the wider gaffer's tape and then put sections on here just so it covers the entire thing. And I'm going to try to smooth out the underside so we have a nice smooth transition from the PEX to the splitter. So hopefully the air stays attached underneath. The top I'm not as concerned about, but definitely want to get rid of these individuals. Now, with these individual pieces, what's nice about gaffer's tape is it really doesn't leave a residue. If I were to use Gorilla Tape on this, I would get a pretty nasty residue along this. So let's pop this off, put the wider gaffer's tape on, and get this nice and pretty. All right, so that's all taped up. Unfortunately, the 3-inch wide tape was not as good as the 2-inch. So for the 2-inch, I'm using this Gaffer Power tape I got on Amazon. It's really high strength. It has good adhesion, no residue. This just doesn't seem like it has the same sort of strength, at least on the adhesion. So we'll see how well this holds up. I also don't know how that's going to hold up with water. Now, how we mount this, we actually have 2 bolts in the back on the subframe, and I have 2 supports up front as well. Since this is a solid piece, I should have all the rigidity I need, and then the front bumper is going to provide some support via the Airdam as well. That's why we used all these bolts, and we should have really good rigidity of this system here. Now, for those front supports, I am going to do something a little bit different. So previously, which I'll show you what we had a bolt go straight up, and we would put this into supports. I have one on that side and then one here as well, so that bolt sticks up, and then we would put a nut on top with a washer to hold that in place. However, I always had difficulty getting that lined up, especially getting the bumper on. So these are the supports they go into. I think we're going to try to weld nuts to those, and similar to what we did in the subframe, that way we can just run a bolt straight up. So it'll be 4 bolts that hold this on, as well as everything on the front bumper support as well. So we'll see how that goes. All right, there we have it. That is our Gridlife splitter. And if you notice, this lip is 3 inches. And we're about to get started on the ChampCar splitter over here. And to explain that, first I got to talk about the rules. So with Gridlife, they specifically say that that lip of 3 inches must follow that outline of the Airdam. So you cannot go more than 3 inches out at any point. In the ChampCar rules, it says 12 inches from the front bumper. But it also states in another area where they clarify is that forms a box around the car. So it's actually square. It's not just 12 inches off the front of the Airdam. So when you look at 12 inches out, we can follow that somewhere out to about here. And now we have much more than 12 inches. So we have something actually closer to 30 inches from here to the front of the tire. Now, normally in a Miata, you can't really use that to your advantage because you have angle problems in the Miata, especially if you mount on the subframe. But I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to end the splitter before the subframe. I'm going to put it at a slight angle. So I'm going to have an angle of attack of about 3 degrees, and I'm also going to have a very slight bow in that. And what I think that's going to do is provide a lot more front downforce and effectively increase the amount of low pressure underneath this splitter and move it forward. And if I can get the rear wing to match up, hopefully I can use all that downforce. So let me tell you about how I'm going to do that.